Anne's influence over her daughter's religion would be one of the longest standing, most profound of all the ways in which she shaped her daughter. Now, I mentioned Matthew Parker, who she appointed to care for Elizabeth spiritually, and he did absolutely honour his promise, and in fact became so close to Elizabeth and so revered by her that she made Parker her first Archbishop of Canterbury. So this was really Anne's lasting legacy, the permanent establishment of Protestantism through her daughter. And you see here at Hampton Court, we have a display at the moment, mother and daughter side by side in religion, if you like, because we have borrowed Anne's beautiful Book of Hours from Hever Castle. And on the right there, we have displayed it next to a Book of Common Prayer used by Elizabeth I. In 1578, Elizabeth and her court went on one of their magnificent progresses to Norfolk. Now, this was Boleyn heartland, where the Boleyns hailed from. And during the progress, Elizabeth attended a service of thanksgiving at Norwich Cathedral. And she asked very specifically that her throne be placed with this view that you see here, because it faced directly onto the Boleyn family chapel. And her eyes, so the others present in the congregation noted, never left that chapel during the service. And by the end of the service, they had filled with tears. Norfolk remained close to Elizabeth's heart and also a real heartland of support for Elizabeth, as was demonstrated in 1588 when the Armada threatened England's shores. And to really show their support for the Queen, the people of Norfolk commissioned all sorts of decorations of showing the Queen's arms, including at this beautiful, very remote church, the Church of St. Margaret's in a tiny village called Tudorcon, where they commissioned this magnificent painted screen that's still remarkably preserved to this day, bearing Elizabeth's arms. And can you see there at the bottom, and I've blown it up for you there on the left, her mother's white falcon. Elizabeth also continued to display her mother's emblems towards the end of her reign. You see in that detail of the sleeve of this famous rainbow portrait and dress, the armillary sphere again appeared just above the head of the serpent. As she grew into old age, Elizabeth continued to be surrounded by Boleyn attendants. Now, the first generation had mostly died off, but there was a new generation to replace them, including Robert Carey, Henry Carey's son, who Elizabeth called Sweet Robert and was very close to. In fact, he was one of the only men who could make her smile in her later years. At the beginning of 1603, Elizabeth had moved to Richmond Palace. It was her favourite palace because it was her warmest palace. Who can blame her? And I think she sensed that her life was now slipping rapidly away. In February that year, she learned of the death of her closest friend and maternal kin, Catherine Carey, shown there on the left. And Elizabeth seemed to give up on life as soon as she heard that news. She refused to go to bed, to rest, to eat, or to drink. And it was only Catherine's widower, Charles Howard, another Boleyn relative, who managed to persuade Elizabeth eventually to take some rest. Therein, Elizabeth's life slipped rapidly away. She died on the 24th of March, 1603, easily like a ripe apple from the tree, mildly like a lamb, according to her chaplain. She was surrounded by her Boleyn relatives to the very end. Her story had started with the Boleyns, and it ended with them too. Throughout her funeral procession in April, her mother's falcon emblem was proudly displayed. And if you peer very closely at her tomb in Westminster Abbey, you will see a tiny carved falcon there too. Well, when it comes to the Tudors, we've been obsessed with the story of Henry VIII and his 6 wives, and debate endlessly whether his daughter Elizabeth really was the Virgin Queen. But along the way, we've missed, I think, the most fascinating relationship of all, that between a mother and daughter who truly changed the course of English history. Thank you very much. And right on cue, Cromwell's just started to bark. Now, I don't know if Heather's going to come back and if we're going to do any questions at all. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna...
Thank you so much, Tracy. Good.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, we were getting an echo on our side because of the microphone on the computer. So I think to do this, I want to give people online a chance to type in questions, which Jonathan can read. But first, how about, do you guys have any questions? Do you have a couple minutes for questions, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm fine. And fine.
Okay.
Yeah, 11 your time.
Great. Okay. All right. I see some hands. Let's start over here. Who are the 3 queens you mean mentioned buried at the tower?
Oh,
Who are the 3 queens?
Yeah, good question. So it's Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, and Lady Jane Grey.
So we're counting Jane Grey. Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yes, absolutely.
Okay. I see here. Okay. Why did the love letters end up in the Vatican?
You know what? I'm so pleased somebody asked that, because what a great question, and one that I'm asked pretty much every talk, because how intriguing is that? I think, we don't know for certain, but we know they made their way there in the 1520s. So this is when Henry's campaign for an annulment was at its height. And the theory that convinces me most is that they were actually stolen by a supporter of Catherine of Aragon, because they didn't show Henry as a very faithful husband, these letters. So they wouldn't exactly make the Pope minded to grant his annulment. So I think it's very likely it was, whether it was the ambassador Chapuis or one of his agents, I don't know, but I think it was probably likely they were stolen and very deliberately made their way to Rome.
Perfect.
There's an online question from Trisha. If Elizabeth wore the same clothing that her mother wore at coronation, does that mean that it's also the same coronation dress Mary I wore? I understand that Elizabeth wore the same coronation that Mary wore to unite the country.
Yes. So when I said it was the same dress, I meant the same style, the same color scheme, rather than necessarily it might have been the same dress, but it appeared the same as the design used for her mother. Now, the one worn by Mary was part of the coronation robes. So during the coronation ceremony, and this still happens, the monarch actually changes robes. They add coronation robes. And so those would have been used for every coronation, but they might not have been the same robes as were worn during the actual procession. So I think Elizabeth and Mary did wear different robes during each of their coronations.
Awesome. Let's take another part.
Yep.
Lisa?
Relationship with either Thomas Boleyn or Elizabeth Boleyn or Mary Boleyn.
Did Elizabeth have any relationship with either Thomas Boleyn, Mary Boleyn, any of the relations? Yeah.
These are great questions. You can tell it's a room full of Tudor aficionados. Thank you. Not that we know of. So either before or after Anne's death, there's no evidence that Elizabeth had any contact with her immediate Boleyn family after her mother's execution. We do know she would have been in the same room as her grandfather, Thomas Boleyn, because they both attended the christening of Elizabeth's baby brother, the future Edward VI. But otherwise, there is no recorded contact whatsoever. And that may have been just because the records don't exist, or it may have been deliberate on Henry's part to keep his daughter away from the Boleyns.
All right, we have an online question.
Monica says, can you elaborate more on the similarities between the coronations?
Oh, yeah. In fact, absolutely, because this is a pet subject of mine. So, yeah, it was striking to me that Elizabeth employed the same set designers, really, and she studied accounts of her mother's coronation. She took the same theme, the same kind of classical theme, and that of the Virgin Mary. So, the overall theme was one of virginity, purity, virtue, which was easier for Elizabeth to pull off than Anne, because Anne was very visibly pregnant by the time she was. But definitely the theme of kind of virtue and of here is a woman, placed by God, chosen by God, to save their people, and also the idea of fertility was a theme. Now, of course, it wouldn't be direct fertility for Elizabeth because she chose to remain unmarried, but she sold herself as being the mother of her people. And so, yeah, it's striking how many little details, and I do go into this in a lot more detail in my book, but how many details Elizabeth borrowed from her mother's coronation.
Okay.